Jenny. Thanks very much for that introduction. I'd also like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I'm joining you all from today, and that is also the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And as you pointed out, Jenny, today is Sorry Day, and I think that's gives us some very significant context to the conversation we're going to have, and reminds us, I suppose, of the importance of acknowledging and addressing the injustices and trauma that continue today, particularly the unacceptably high number of First Nations children in out-of-home care and also in Victoria's criminal justice system. I do have a presentation that I will sort of talk to and use as a bit of a guide. If that's okay, I'm going to share screen with that. Means I'm going to lose all of your faces. I apologise, but I'll turn it off when we open up for the question section. So I hope that works all right for you all. So bear with me. I'm not incredibly IT savvy, but we did get it going before. So hopefully you can all see that. I hope that's okay to walk through it like that, because when I go full screen, I think I lose the going. So I hope you can see that main screen. But tonight very much is about, as Jenny suggested, a bit of an intro about Youthlaw, who I work for, and also Smart Justice for Young People, the Youth Justice Coalition that I co-convene, and then talk more particularly about the work that we hope to do that the Humanists Victoria grant is kindly supporting to develop up a election platform heading into Victoria state election in November. And I will drill down to some of the, I would like to talk about some of the key policy asks that inevitably will sit in that platform with a particular focus on raising the age of criminal responsibility, and just briefly touch on some ways that I suppose you individually and as a group might like to engage and get involved in some of that work if that's of interest to you. So that's where we'll end up, and then I'm very happy, as Jenny suggested, to take some of your questions in the chat. So a little bit about Youthlaw. As Jenny mentioned, I'm the Advocacy and Human Rights at Youthlaw, Advocacy and Human Rights Officer, sorry, at Youthlaw. I've actually been with them for over 16 years now, so I like to refer to myself as one of the golden girls at Youthlaw that have been around for a while now. But Youthlaw is a specialist community legal centre in Victoria for young people under 25, and we very much focus on working to achieve systemic responses to the legal, human rights and social justice issues facing young people through our and our education programs. Just to give you a bit of a feel for who we particularly assist, we are statewide, and obviously we don't service all young Victorians, so we do end up targeting our limited resources to work, I suppose, particularly with very at-risk and vulnerable young people with a range of complex sort of underpinning issues and backgrounds. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of who we particularly assist. And also just wanted to give you a quick sort of flavour generally of the types of legal issues that some of the young people we assist present with. And that's some of the key issues. Probably our number one is fines of all varieties. We do some criminal matters, crimes compensation matters. Family violence is also a very significant issue a lot of young people present with, and we do provide civil law responses to a range of issues, including contracts and debts and etc. And we have probably in our staff of about, I think we're up to about 14 or so. We have we have around 9 lawyers. Some are very part-time, a couple are full-time, and they will provide services to young people. It could be just information, basic legal information over the phone, our sort of hotline, or we might be providing more detailed advice or ongoing casework support. And occasionally we do court representation, particularly for criminal matters and family violence matters. And in general terms, I suppose it's useful to think about the work that Youthlaw does in complementing the work that Victoria Legal Aid will do also with young people under 25. So effectively for matters that they can't assist in or aren't legally aided to assist in, Youthlaw generally will. And that's sort of the way we try to not duplicate and sort of complement the work we do. So that's a little bit about the legal issues and a little bit about Youthlaw. Happy to field more questions later, but I suppose just for the sake of time and getting to the gritty issues we want to get to tonight, I also wanted to just give you a bit more of a sense of smart justice for young people. So in my role as the Advocacy and Human Rights Officer, I'm largely responsible for the policy and advocacy work of Youthlaw. And as Jenny sort of indicated, back in 2011, we were fortunate enough to be able to set up and launch Smart Justice for Young People, which I think now the membership has grown to over 50 organisations from a whole range of youth, legal, community sector, health organisations. And yeah, it's grown over time, which is fabulous. And I suppose in essence, what the group's trying to provide is a coordinated and expert voice advocating for change and reform that will help children and young people have the best chance to succeed in life, to support their families in their communities, and ideally keep them away from the criminal justice system. And yeah, we've advocated on a whole range of issues over time. I think some of the key ones are diversion, which again Jenny raised. There's a significant group of us a number of years ago putting a lot of energy in as a coalition to ensure that diversion was actually legislated in the Children's Court, and that's been running relatively successfully over a number of years now. So as Jenny suggested, the grant that we received from Humanists Victoria is really going to enable Smart Justice for Young People to continue to facilitate and I suppose resource some of the coalition members in their collective youth justice advocacy leading up to the Victorian state election. At the moment, my role as a policy officer at funds, so we are reliant on sourcing funds from other philanthropics and other sources such as Humanists. We also have a small grant from the Kimberley Foundation as well that helps in that space. And we pretty much operate fairly informally. We do come together as the broad membership quarterly to just sort of share information about youth justice issues, different programs that have started, what sort of, what will be our focus in terms of policy, etc. But we've divided off into a number of working groups. That's where the hard advocacy happens, I suppose. And they sort of marry up with some of the priority areas that I'll talk to in a moment, which is around some of these sorts of areas. So I think it's useful just to give you a little bit of an overview of where we would imagine some of our key policy platform asks sort of resting, and they very much align with what have been some key focuses for smart justice for young people over a number of years. And I've sort of tried to give a bit of an overview there. So key for us is calling on government to sort of increase investment in community-led, place-based initiatives to very much tackle disadvantage and other drivers of child and adolescent offending, and to strengthen children and families. That's been core and central to a lot of our work over a number of years. Another one that we are doing a lot of work on this year, and we have a separate working group focusing on some of the advocacy activities in this space. It's ambitious, but we are calling for an end to the overrepresentation in the criminal justice system of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and young people, children and young people from multicultural backgrounds, girls and young women with complex needs, and children in residential care. We also, for a long time, have been advocating for Victorian government to commit to raise the age of criminal responsibility from 10 to at least 14 years of age. And the work we do in that space is very much aligned with and contributing to the national campaign to raise in more detail a little bit later. And the sort of the fourth sort of broad general area that we're focusing on, and we also have another working group led by the policy officer from the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Centre, is promoting humane treatment of young people in youth detention. And in that space, there's a number of sort of policy focuses, which are around improving the access to health services and the health outcomes for children in detention when released from detention and transitioning into the community. An end to the use of solitary confinement is one of the asks, and also supporting the implementation of the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhumane or degrading treatment protocol that you might be familiar with. So we're very much advocating at the moment to try and encourage the Victorian government to be implementing that OPCAT protocol, and we'll continue to do so. So look, I don't think this slide will, probably necessarily surprise you, but we know that the most effective way to promote health and well-being in every young person's life is to provide support as early as possible, and as well as at critical points in their life. And unfortunately, what we see in Victoria, and I suppose in other jurisdictions across the country, is that unfortunately a very small percentage of current sort of youth justice budgets is allocated to early intervention programs. And conversely, we know that a very large amount of Victorian budget is invested in either policing responses and in, our youth detention centres. We feel that there is a better balance, that there must be much more of an emphasis on investment into early supports, and that would help, young people and families address many of the sorts of issues that are listed there that underpin the backgrounds and experiences of many young people that enter into the criminal justice system, and particularly into youth detention. So, young kids who have disengaged from schooling, young people with drug and alcohol abuse issues, young people with mental health issues, young people with a range of disabilities. So that's just a general underpinning ask, I suppose, in our work that will continue on. And similarly, again, I don't think I'll be sort of sharing with you anything you haven't sort of been aware of or thought about before, but this project very much is going to strive to improve the outcomes of disadvantaged and vulnerable young people, especially from some of these high-risk communities that are in contact with or at risk of entering into the criminal justice system. And those stats are quite alarming, but they're also quite consistent, and it's something that the annual Youth Parole Board reports, that they sort of reference a annual survey done at one particular night in the Youth Justice Centre, and these are the sorts of stats that come from that survey. And so in Victoria, children who live in residential care, Aboriginal children, children from culturally and linguistically diverse communities are particularly affected by the structural inequities and social exclusion. And despite, you know, all sorts of investment, I suppose, and efforts over many years, we've really not been able to adequately respond to some of the known drivers of youth crime and overrepresentation. So while the faces and the names of overrepresented children and young people have probably changed over time, their negative and racialised experiences and outcomes in our justice system have sadly very much persisted. So as a group, Smart Justice for Young People believes it's really time for us to acknowledge the systemic racism as a key driver of overrepresentation of Aboriginal children and young people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. And by acknowledging it, we must commit to ending systemic racism and eliminating its underlying causes and conditions. So that's a big, ambitious focus for the group this year and some of the working group activities. I wanted to just spend, if I may, just a little bit more time going into some detail in terms of our work around advocating to raise the age of criminal responsibility. And again, some of you might already be quite engaged in this campaign, so apologies if I'm going to sort of the basics for you, but I'm imagining most of you would be very aware that, you know, right now in Victoria and across Australia, children as young as 10 are arrested, prosecuted and detained in youth jails. And that, you know, back in 2020, there were around, you know, just under 500 young people in youth jails. And although the number, particularly in Victoria, at the moment, is quite low, and that's a good thing that we've been working towards. I think it's down around about 30 of young people between 13 and under. For every child locked up, you know, we know that there are many hundreds more proceeded against by police in terms of arrests. So when we're talking about the Raise the Age campaign, I mean, yes, obviously we're going to continue to give a focus to the pointy end of children 10, 11, 12, 13 ending up in youth justice facilities, but I think we also want to be really cognizant of the treatment and response to young people in terms of policing and other sort of criminal justice responses. Oops, my screen is frozen for a minute. Oops, there we go. Sorry about that. It's jumped to the end. I didn't mean to. There we go. Hang on. Sorry, I think we have jumped ahead. So in terms of the why, there's so much compelling evidence, obviously, for why we should be raising the age. There's volumes of, studies and statistics that show that the younger a child has their first contact with the criminal justice system, the higher the chance of future offending and also of them becoming entrenched in the criminal justice system. There was an excellent report back in 2016 by the Victorian Sentencing Advisory Council, reoffending by children and young people in Victoria, that found with each 1 year increase in a child's age at first sentence, there is an 18% reduction in the likelihood of reoffending. So it's quite compelling reason for why, for those critical early years, we should be very much focused on keeping them out of the criminal justice system. Similarly, in terms of the failure, I suppose, of Australia to meet international sort of standards in this space, the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child recommended back in 2019 that the minimum age of criminal responsibility should be at least 14 years of age globally. So we're very much falling behind that international standard. And in effect, and I can just show you this slide and then jump back, the sort of medium across a whole range of countries actually sits at around 14. There's some that would have it, just 10 or under as well, but there are other countries that jump up as high as 16 years or more. And so again, we're just, failing on that front quite poorly. The other sorts of compelling reasons is found in the medical evidence. There's basically enormous medical and scientific consensus that suggests that children should not be held criminally responsible, that between the ages of 10 and 14, children are undergoing significant mental, emotional and physical growth and development. That basically children in grades 4, 5 and 6 are not at a cognitive level of development where they are able to fully comprehend or appreciate the criminal nature of their actions or the lifelong consequences of criminalisation. There's other evidence out there too that just says that really full cognitive functioning doesn't really develop until people reach their early 20s. So there's actually, arguably a suggestion that we should be raising the age much higher, but for now, at least 14 would be a great sort of response. And I suppose the final reason we would sort of argue about why we need to raise the age is obviously that we all know that sending children to jail causes terrible harm. Our juvenile detention system can fail to rehabilitate and reintegrate young people. Children that are forced into contact with the criminal justice system are less likely to complete their education, and they're often separated from their communities, and just making it that much harder for them to develop and grow in around. So, I mean, it poses sort of the obvious questions for us about, how would Victoria go about raising the age and replacing the current sort of criminal justice response? And I think maybe actually just leading into that, I might actually sort of give us a little bit of update and make sure we're all on the same page about where Australia is at in potentially exploring raising the age and implementing that sort of legislative change. Basically, the Attorney Generals from across the nation promised a plan to develop a proposal to raise the age over 3 years ago, but they haven't actually delivered anything on that promise. They did go into a review process. They did receive hundreds of submissions. They have prepared a report that looked into the proposal to raise the age, but that report hasn't been made public. The submissions, apart from the ones on the website, haven't been made public, so we can't access the report and what has actually been suggested, even though we have a great suspicion that it would have recommended, surprisingly, to raise the age. In the meantime, and so there's still a push for that process with the Attorney Generals to sort of see out that process and come good on making some sort of actual commitment and recommendations. But in the meantime, in 2020, the ACT government did commit to raising the age to 14, and the Northern Territory government also agreed in principle to increasing the age to 12 rather than 14, and that was in line with a recommendation that flowed from a Royal Commission they conducted some time ago back into their youth detention system. And this is sort of happening at the same time where we've had, back last year around June, we had 30 countries calling on Australia to raise the age during a United Nations human rights review. And the Australian government sort of rejected this call by the other nations. So that's sort of the context. And then here in Victoria, you know, obviously we've been advocating on this issue for a long time. And I suppose we could say in general terms that it feels that behind the scenes, when you're speaking to government ministers and their advisors, that they are actually reasonably supportive of the idea of raising the age, but they're just not politically brave enough, I don't think. They're not prepared to take the lead. They keep deferring back to the national process that's at play and saying they're waiting for that to come down, and then they'll happily follow in line and implement that. We don't think that's adequate. We don't think that's sort of good enough. However, I mean, also I suppose in the Victorian context, the Victorian government is probably doing some other things in the youth justice space to try and limit the number of 14-year-olds ending up in youth justice detention, and that's why we do have relatively low numbers in Victoria at the moment. So that is a good thing, but ultimately, you know, it still requires a legislated commitment. So in terms of what that reform, you know, could look like, or what we'd be sort of saying the Victorian government should do, would be to ultimately just make the commitment to raise the age of criminal responsibility to 14, with no exceptions. There are concerns that they would carve out exceptions for certain more serious offences. Then, I mean, I think it's important to think about what's the alternative. I think every time we go in and with a minister or advisor, they're obviously pushing back, particularly from the policing angle. Like if a young person is out on the streets at 2 a.m. Exhibiting behaviours that would normally be considered offending, what is the response for police? What are they supposed to do at that point? And I suppose our response would be, in the first instance, that children who are out after hours should be returned to the care of their parents or carer if that is safe to do so. But if there are immediate, you know, protective concerns, then the police could potentially notify child protection if that's appropriate. But there are many other sort of after-hour services that could be adapted or better funded or enhanced to work and support Victoria Police in partnership to ensure that these young people are getting therapeutic, restorative, rehabilitative response, which in our service systems that are in place, we don't feel that they're necessarily having to create, you know, a whole new service system. Really, we see it more as an enhancing, expanding existing programs that, you know, we've got good evidence of already working. So we're not confident that that should be a real fear factor for the police or for the government. And similarly, in that space of, you know, well, then also what happens if it's not a criminal justice response? What is the response to a child who commits a serious crime? And again, we would advocate very strongly that the focus should be on rehabilitation, you know, community safety and supporting the victims of the offending. And this could be through, you know, restorative justice processes, if the victim consents, and if they're, you know, if the victim's being provided with proper support. That obviously there needs to be a real rehabilitation focus with the child, no matter what the harmful behaviour is. We really should be dedicating more resources to the children most at risk of further offending, not less. So there needs to be tailored and intensive supports for the child and their family, while the child is in the community, ideally, not in a facility, unless they have, you know, serious health or mental health issues. And so I think, as I said before, we see our work at Smart Justice for Young People very much contributing to and complementing a national campaign for Raise the Age, which is very much driven by a whole range of Aboriginal advocacy organisations, particularly. So if you haven't already checked out and you're interested to, should definitely jump on their website. They have a national petition going, which I understand is getting up around the 200,000 mark. So that's, you know, really encouraging. And there is talk of in each of the states. So we would do this for Victoria, but actually presenting those petitions to the Attorney General and other relevant ministers in the near future, just to keep the issue on the agenda and maybe mount some pressure, you know, and have a whole range of activities mounting pressure leading up to the state election. We are really reliant very much on community members raising their voices on this issue and keeping the pressure on their local MPs. It's interesting when we go and chat to ministers about this issue that they are impacted by the volume of emails they get from local constituents. So there's still real value, I think, and power in doing that. And we think, you know, there's also great value and currency in different community groups championing the issue and organising their own sorts of community events or hosting different online events, etc. Recently, actually, we had some corporate sort of support by Lush. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Lush, that do those really yeah, highly scented soaps, etc. They had a week where they were promoting the races that they encourage people buying their products to sign and to mail off. So I think there's all sorts of options in that space that I'd be, you know, really happy to explore with you and support if that was of interest to your members. But I think that's sort of where I was just going to land at this stage. Obviously, this is the start of, you know, a relationship and conversation with you, and very happy for you to make contact with me with any particular interests you have in this space. So feel free to do that. But otherwise, yeah, I'm really happy to try and address some of your questions. I'll just try and come back to the group. There we go. did anyone, want to kick off? Have any sort of burning questions? I'm happy for you just to.
I just want to kick off if I could, by asking you, Tiffany, if there are any case studies that you might like to tell us about. Not so much about individuals, but I was more thinking of programs or things that have been tried that you feel have been very effective, or things that have been turning points in this journey, because you've been on it for a long time, and you somehow seem undaunted, although I could imagine that it perhaps has kind of a few other people along the road might have been tempted to throw the towel in. So are there any kind of issues that you could tell us about that have been significantly effective?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I'd probably go back to some of the advocacy work we've done in the diversion space, and I think the reason I go back there always is because of some of the credible stories that we heard directly from young people about how some of those sorts of programs and opportunities, really did genuinely make such a difference in terms of, whether that's them being heard, listened to, had sort of tailored responses, wraparound supports, being believed, given second chances, all of those sorts of things that were being shared by young people at the time. Even though I feel like those programs are fantastic, and there are quite a few of them out there that in different guises. I'm not sure though that they're the panacea, like that's the response of itself, like just more and more diversion programs, because at the end of the day, we still have to make this commitment to getting in to be supporting families and young people much earlier and more appropriately, I think, because even diversion, you could say that's it's just coming in still too late in terms of what that response and support could look like. And that's why I suppose from diversion, in terms of a focus, acknowledging all the good things that can offer individual young people, we sort of started our advocacy to focus much more on this notion of justice reinvestment, I suppose, in terms of the importance of early supports, the importance of those supports being identified and designed very much by the communities where the young people live, that there's not sort of a one size fits all, that it needs to be these sorts of solutions that address some of the issues of the young folk really need to be community led in different areas. And that investment will look different for different communities ultimately, and it's complex, and it's difficult for the governments to get their heads around actually delegating monies to different communities to come up with these sorts of solutions. But it is the sort of braver way and more appropriate way to go. So I suppose even though we haven't got there in the Victorian context, we haven't sort of been able to turn it around and get government much more prepared to invest at that sort of early end. That's why we ultimately need to do that, because we just hear too many of the stories of young people that just miss out on those sorts of supports.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because you can identify the problem when someone is behaving antisocially. That's a problem. But as you say, it's hard to get your head around what is actually needed at a much earlier preventative level.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's definitely not. It's not easy work, but it's just at the moment the way the system works, it's still the young person that's sort of being made accountable for the behaviour, which that's, you know, that's okay, but I feel like it's not necessarily acknowledging some of the systems failings that have happened along the way, you know, and until we're sort of you know, able to acknowledge some of those systems failings, then we're not sort of getting the full picture, that, or the full influence of what's leading to this young person being in that particular situation.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question or would like to make a comment? And that includes anyone who's in the room here at the library. So please.
Possibly, yes.
Come.
Thanks. I'm Stephen now. So thank you very much, Tiffany, for a very interesting rundown on the whole difficult question of advocacy. I have a question beyond that about Youthlaw dealing with young clients. What sort of length of time does it take to clear a problem up? How long do you spend, you know, a couple of weeks, or do you spend a couple of years with some young person's problem? What's the sort of span of those things?
Yeah. So for criminal matters, I mean, obviously, you know, be a range of variables in there in terms of what the offending is and what their journey looks like through the court systems. But yeah, it's not usually a quick fix or a short amount of time. I can say that pretty confidently. Our lawyers would be often supporting young people through the court processes for, you know, easily a year, depending on the, you know, particularly at the moment, there is such incredible backlog of matters in the courts, so that can be drawn out. So it really does vary, but it can be quite a lengthy process, because there can be multiple, you know, mentions and adjournments, and before anything is sort of finalised in the court system. And then we would obviously also, as part of our service, sort of follow up with young people in terms of issues coming up for them post those, you know, whatever decision the court makes, you know, whether they're on a diversion order or whatever, we're still available to sort of follow through and support them through those sort of processes. So yeah, it's hard to give a very definitive answer, but it can be, yeah, could be resolved quickly, maybe if the charges are dropped or something like that happened, or it could drag on for a length of time.
Does anyone online have a question? Would you like to put your hand up, or Bernie? Yes.
Yeah, g'day, Tiff. I just wanted to say two things. One was congratulations on the incredible commitment that you have to your role. You're a real hero in the sector, and whether you like it or not, that's who and what you are.
Thank you.
I've more recently in my life, since I've been retired, become much more aware of the concept of a young person who's been in the Youth Justice Centre being properly forgiven. Having worked in a community in West Heidelberg where it was almost a rite of passage for a young person to at least flit through the youth justice system, there was an automatic forgiveness. But I find that kids who, for instance, live in the out-of-home care system or in broader families, once they've been there, it leaves a stain, and it's, I call it forgiveness, but they just don't ever seem to get forgiven properly.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure whether there's a legal process that would assist that happening. You know, a kid goes to court, either gets guilty or not guilty, gets a sentence or normally doesn't get a sentence, of course, but still walks out with a sort of a stain. And I always reckon that I remember sitting on the Youth Parole Board where the judges that we had, Judge Cullity and Judge Burke, when a young person had finished their parole, they used to say, you know, you're basically over this now. This is another part of your life. Get on with your life. And I used to really revel in that and think, you know, this kid can get now. There's a story about a young person who'd been pinched for armed robbery, and he did his parole. And then as the judge paroled him, he walked out and said, now can I spend the money? But I just do think that this concept of forgiveness is something that we should be aware of.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that really resonates, Bernie. And the stigma is enormous, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep.
And I wonder, because we were all quite pleased when, Victoria very belatedly introduced spent convictions that supposedly, after a period of time will wipe criminal records, away, which is, really significant. And that means at least a future employer won't necessarily have that come up. But that's just one element of it, isn't it?
It is.
Because then for anyone in their sort of circle that is aware of their background, it's still there with them. So I'd be interested what sort of programs would sort of really touch on that. I don't know that. Is it the restorative justice programs that would, ultimately you for these young people to actually hear from a victim that consents to being there and is really engaged and prepared to say directly to them that they forgive them? Is that part of the journey?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Or is it also needing to come from some sort of
broader
authorities? Yeah.
Anyway, it's just
it's a really interesting reflection. I don't really have the answer, but it would be good because that would allow the young people to move on.
Yes, as a person, as an adult.
Exactly.
I have a comment about that. I mean, I think that it's an easy kind of road to stigmatize someone who's been in prison, because for many people, they don't have any kind of connection with that. And so, you're a bad egg or, the black sheep of the family. It's very easy to kind of hang some negative connotation on someone who's had, significant trouble in the courts and the system. And I think maybe the fact that some of our politicians have been in prison recently, like Darren Hinch and Pauline Hanson and so on, it is not the kind of end of their journey, that they've rehabilitated themselves in public life and so on. I mean, I'm not sure where that fits with all of this, what you're talking about forgiveness, but I mean, I think forgiveness stigma is very convenient.
I call it forgiveness. I call it forgiveness. Maybe that's my Catholic background too, Kieran.
I still suffer pangs of guilt as some of my early childhood exploits as well. And, a secret longing to be forgiven by those I hurt, I guess.
Yeah.
But Tiffany, I've got a question. I was wondering, as you spoke, what sort, if any, input do you have to police training?
Yeah, really interesting question. Over the years, that's definitely been an area we've tried to influence. I mean, I haven't talked about it tonight, but obviously treatment by police is a keen focus of smart justice for young people. And we have been fortunate enough to at different times, you know, develop reasonably friendly relations, I suppose, with the Victoria Police Command, and be able to, you know, either try and input to training curriculum that goes to their academy or refresher training, etc. So, look, there are elements of their training that you would think is quite sound and quite appropriate in this space, but it's just so brief. You know, I mean, the training, the amount of topics and the amount of training that new members receive for them to, you know, develop their skills in trauma-informed, age-appropriate, you know, responses to children. I mean, that takes years to develop for social workers or other specialists in the field. So I don't know how we expect our police to, you know, develop those skills with the very limited training they receive. So that the training is an ongoing issue. But then for me, at the other end, if it's almost implausible that some of these new members are going to sort of be able to really refine their skills in that space, then we have to ensure that we've got processes in place to be making sure that police are very accountable and transparent in the way they respond and treat young people and all community members. And that's what's also the training we haven't got quite right. And then we just don't have the appropriate oversight of police either in their conduct. And so it's sort of at both bookends, we're still got a long way to go in Victoria, really. We don't have independent oversight of police complaints, and the training, yes, it's improved, but no, it's I don't think it's comprehensive enough.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Oh, I've got a question.
Good.
Thanks for the talk, Tiffany. Kevin
Pleasure.
Bain here.
Hi, Kevin.
Some time ago, I heard a speech by, I think the title was the Victorian Commissioner for Indigenous Young People, Mr. Jacamos.
Ah, yes, Andrew Jacamos.
Andrew
Yes,
Jacamos, yeah.
Yep.
What is do you know what the role is in these issues of his position nowadays, and how and what sort of work do they do in this space?
That's, yes. So that Andrew Jacamos was the first Aboriginal Commissioner for Children, sitting within the Commission for Children and Young People that obviously Bernie played a critical role in as the Commissioner for many years. And so that position still exists. Andrew isn't in that position anymore. I think they're actually maybe just recruiting for another Aboriginal Children's Commissioner. But it's a very important role. The last commissioner, Aboriginal Commissioner, was responsible for leading a very extensive piece of work that really was able to document, you know, Aboriginal young people's experience of the youth justice system, and make such incredibly extensive recommendations of what needs to happen to improve their experience of the system and to change their experience of the system. And it was very much driven by the voices of the young people themselves. So that inquiry was enormous, but it was very important, and we hope that that will be really guiding how Victoria conducts it, you know, its work in the youth justice space, particularly as it affects Aboriginal children and young people. So it's a really important position. It's been around, Bernie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know, how long's it been around for now? 7, 8 years or something?
I think we've lost Bernie.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's right. Sorry.
He might have a visitor that he would
No,
have to
that's all
go
right.
off to.
That's all right.
So,
Yeah, but it's a really significant, important role. Yeah.
I mean, many recommendations came out of that, but do we know, whether they've been taken up or?
No, that's always the the big question, isn't it, with these reports? That might just sit on the shelf, however well they read. My understanding is, I mean, it was only released last year, in fairness to the government. I think that in principle there's agreement with a lot of the recommendations. Whether I'd probably need to really review exactly where we're at. My understanding would be that some would have been implemented, but many of them not yet. And it will be, partly advocates' role to keep the pressure on government to implement them. So I suppose with any of the policy asks that we make as part of our policy election platform, we'd be very much reminding government of all the relevant recommendations sitting in that report. They will very much underpin a lot of what we're asking for, because they eminently make a lot of sense, and they are very much driven, by the children and their families themselves.
I mean, it may be very important for us to be more aware of those recommendations too, in terms of submissions that we might be able to make.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes. Okay. Similar to you, liaising with the police, I was wondering if you have much liaison with in the educational space, given that, what was the figure? That 68% of kids in youth detention or youth justice, the youth justice space, have been suspended or expelled. And I mean, we know that there are occasionally there are some very creative programs that gather up young people who are failing at school and are very effective in doing that. But I'm not quite sure how widespread that is. And I was wondering, whether or not they're interested in your point of, the educationalists are interested in your feedback, and vice versa, whether you can have much impact.
No, it is a really important area for us to be, I suppose, doing more work in partnership with schools and education. I think probably up until quite recently, the bulk of our relations with education would be through programs, government-funded programs like Navigator, which community agencies were running, which were very much about trying to, if schools were flagging students at risk, particularly at risk of engaging with the criminal justice system, that they would come in and provide, a pretty sort of holistic response to these young people to try to keep them engaged in education. But unfortunately, that's a wonderful program, and the government's extended their support for that program. But I think we're well aware that there'd be a whole range of other children not engaged in the Navigator program that are still at risk of disengaging from school, or at risk of what they call soft expulsions, where the school doesn't actually expel them, but it's like a gentle push out of their school. So actually, part of the work that, I don't know if you remembered me briefly referencing, that within Smart Justice for Young People this year, there's a discrete working group focusing on overrepresentation of children. One of the key focuses and areas will be education, and just really honing in on what more we should and could be doing in that space, because that's such a critical area, and we probably haven't had the relations we should have had over a number of years.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, can we then revisit, just to recap, the ways in which you would see this next 6 months proceeding and your hopes for involvement from the community in the goals that you have for your advocacy before the election? Would you like to just quickly give us some dot points? Perhaps I won't put this sharing slide up again, because it's easier to hear you actually without it. So
not to put it up, no. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, certainly. So I think in terms of our next steps will be very much coming together as a broader coalition group, and sort of centralizing all sort of our various youth justice policy focuses and asks over time. And we've got, you know, so that will be the workings of those individual working groups. We did a very broad advocacy piece last year for the review into the criminal justice system. So we sort of bringing a lot of that together, and then basically getting endorsement, discussion, and then endorsement from the broad group about whether they're all agreeing to follow through on those sorts of policy areas. So that will take some time, because, you know, we're talking over 50 groups and we're, you know, over 200 members. So we'll need probably a couple of months to get to a point of having sort of an agreed policy position, because then the thinking is that becomes a resource and reference for the individual members. Once they've got that policy platform, all these agencies go off and do their own advocacy, you know, for their internal advocacy for their agencies. They've all got their own agendas. Youth justice is just a part of that. So we want to arm them with sort of some of the key asks, so that when we're all individually going to do our advocacy, we're all on the same song page in terms of what we're asking in the youth justice space. We will also call for some collective lobbying and advocacy where representatives of the coalition go in together, but also some of those member agencies that, you know, might not be as active in the space, just so that they're really clear and loud about what we're calling for in that space. So that will be the main push, is the development of the policy, resourcing of the groups, and then actually coordinating what that sort of lobbying pre-election looks like. I don't know that there will be, for the work we do, apart from probably different in the raise the age space, but all of that work won't be necessarily public campaign facing. Won't be doing like an election campaign on those issues leading up to election. That's not going to be within our capacity. It's more what we can do as at least 50 agencies that are invested in these issues to get, you know, to try and help get these issues over the line. Raise the Age is a little bit different because there is already a public-facing campaign attached. So we will be doing our bit to ramp that up and encourage our respective networks to get involved and, you know, be Raise the Age champions and run community events. So that will be a little bit different. But otherwise, it's resourcing members to do their advocacy work, their campaign work, their media work in, you know, on these youth justice issues.
So everyone can get on to raisetheage.org.au, sign the petition,
yes,
and also consider writing to their MP about this.
Local MPs, and I'm happy to, along the journey, if there was interest, Jenny, obviously to.
We seem to have lost you.
She's frozen.
Oh dear.
Share.
Yes.
Is everyone hearing you still? Sorry.
Yes, you've just come back. Oh, no. Don't know quite why that's happening to you. Anyway, by the sound of it, you were about to offer us some support in that area. So, and you've given us the details about how to contact you. So, yes. Okay, well, there was something else I was going to ask and I've forgotten what it is now. I've just lost my train of thought. Oh, I know. Can you hear me, Tiffany? Perhaps not. She's still there. Oh dear. She's disappeared. We've lost her. I was wondering, my question was going to be what the change of government might mean at a federal level about the raise the age issue, because I rather thought that the new government was more receptive to making progress about this issue. I don't know if anyone else knows anything along those lines, but that was my understanding about it. Anyhow, I think that we seem to have lost Tiffany. It's been one of those days. So it's a very interesting topic, I think, one that is quite hard to see in its entirety, to see the precursor and the sort of ramifications of. So it's a great opportunity to have someone who's worked in this area to lead us further into the complexities of it, and to assist us in attempting to be more effective. So that, I mean, we need to be mindful. There's excellent data to show that once young people get involved in youth justice, they are greatly more likely to end up in the adult justice system. And so it's the beginning of further difficulties frequently. So if there are possibilities of being effective and increasing awareness about what needs to happen to head that off, I think it's a very good area to be involved with. So I'm just going to, here she is, she's back. Hello, Tiffany, can you hear me? Yes, hi. No, I've just been sort of wrapping up actually.
Yeah, no, I thought so. Sorry, I think my connection just fell out, so apologies for that.
I had one last question, which was that it was my understanding, but I wasn't totally confident about it, that the new government is more receptive to this idea of raising the age. Is that correct, or?
Yes, I think, yes, the new federal government should, yes, we understand is potentially more receptive. I don't know that they've made any absolute commitments, but I think we are all much more optimistic federally that, yeah, so that will, in a way, that will pave the way, hopefully, for Victoria. So
yes,
we'll see where that goes in the next few months.
Yes, okay. Well, thank you very much. I know you've had a busy day and you have a great deal to be juggling at the moment. So we're very grateful for your input about this. And we look forward to kind of being able to be involved at some level to understand this, in the first instance, understand this issue better, not just to sort of be reading the statistics in the paper, but to understand, you know, how it happens and to see if there is some way in which we can help sort of change the course of these young lives for the better. So
thanks, Jenny. I'll definitely keep you posted and think of ways that you can engage and and
yes, thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, so it just remains to ask everyone to express